Well, let's get started. Hey, thank you all who are filing in today. Thank you all for joining me. You may have heard that this summer marks the 250th birthday of the United States of America. There are a lot of efforts right now to commemorate this moment, to try and learn lessons from the last quarter millennium of American history and more. One such worthwhile effort is being led by my guest today, and I hope you'll allow me to introduce her. I am honored to be joined today by Dr. Colleen Shogan. Colleen served most recently as the 11th Archivist of the United States. Colleen was a senior vice president at the White House Historical Association and also senior executive at the Library of Congress's Congressional Research Service. She is also an award-winning political scientist. It is great to see a fellow academic actually turning out well. Currently, Colleen is senior advisor at More Perfect, where she leads the In Pursuit project, which is a nationwide effort to understand the successes and failures of the American experiment over the past 250 years. I was just listening to one of the In Pursuit podcast episodes that was a great conversation about James Madison, describing him as not necessarily the Constitution's architect, but its lead strategist, since he was like the one founder who understood agenda control. You should definitely check this out. It's a good conversation. So I have a number of questions for Colleen about this project. But first of all, Colleen, I'm really grateful for your time today. Welcome.
Well, I'm so excited to be here. And, we've been friends for such a long time, and it's great to be able to be on Substack Live together.
Awesome. Thank you. So, all right, I'll jump right in. So, the In Pursuit program, in it kind of its introductory paragraphs, it begins by pointing out the very low levels of trust Americans have in their political institutions. According to a Pew survey last year, I think it's just 17% of Americans say they trust the government in Washington to do what is right most or all of the time. Now, to some extent, this is new. But also, trust in institutions generally has just been declining for the past, like, roughly half century, not necessarily in one line, though. I'm curious what you see as like the main sources of people's distrust in the political system. And is this something that can be remedied?
Right. Well, thanks for that question. I mean, I think the first observation to make is that not necessarily is distrust a bad thing. And I think as someone, as you study American political culture, American political institutions, Americans have traditionally been skeptical of concentrated power, probably throughout American history. So, questioning institutions, questioning the government, having some level of I guess you could call it distrust, is not necessarily unhealthy. But you do point out that it has been trending not necessarily in a perfectly linear fashion, but it has certainly over the past several decades been decreasing, and that is something to be aware of and to try to account for. I would say this, that I mean, a couple observations. You can't just demand trust from institutions. You can't just say, "Hey, trust me." Hey, uh, you know, uh, that's not how it works. People have to actually see value and coming out of their institutions that is affecting their lives positively or enabling them to do the things that they want to do, the life that they want to live, the pursuit of happiness as Americans. It has to be tangible in a real way. An example after World War II, one example that comes to mind to me would be the GI Bill, the passage of the GI Bill. Not a perfect piece of policy, not implemented uniformly across the board. Many African Americans were not eligible or were unable to take advantage of it, but it did restore trust in institutions. And because of its efficacy and the number of people who took advantage of it and then had their lives appreciably changed after taking advantage of the GI Bill. I'll give an example that I certainly experienced at the National Archives when I came on board as the Archivist of the United States. The number one thing I was worried about, a discrete problem, there was a lot of things that were concerning, but the number one problem that I knew I had to solve had to do with veterans records in the United States. There was, at one point in time, over a 700,000 request backlog for veterans records at the National Archives. By the time I came on board, it was probably around it hovered around, a little over 400,000 backlog. And this was due to the pandemic, because a lot of those, records people think that all the records are digitized, they're not. They exist in very, very large archival storage facilities.
Mm, everything okay?
Oh, I went blank.
Yeah.
I don't know why for a
Oh, okay.
second. I'm back. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So I don't know. I really don't know what happened there. But I'm back. These records existing in St. Louis, and they're paper records, and veterans need access to their military records for all kinds of reasons to claim the benefits that are due to them. In some cases, for families want them for genealogy purposes. In other cases, for families who are seeking burial rights for their loved ones who have passed away in military cemeteries across the country. But you need access to those records to be able to do it. And when I came on board, I mean, I can tell you that veterans groups were not happy. The trust was low because of this excessive backlog that had surmounted and gathered over a period of probably about 2 years. So I knew I mean, I could talk a great game. I could say, I'm going to solve this, or I'm going to try
Yeah.
to help, or I'm here, or I understand you, or my family is filled with veterans. I understand what you're going. I could say all those things, rhetorically, which I did. But really, I knew the only way to restore trust in the institution from those groups was to solve the problem, was to make a difference. And so, it was the first trip that I took a week after I came into office was to head out to St. Louis and meet with our excellent leadership team, out at St. Louis, and then meet with all the staff members in St. Louis, all the people, the archivist technicians, all the people that worked at the National Archives, and talk to them and do a staff meeting and find out, exactly how we were gonna approach this and what was gonna be done. And also to ask people that, we're not gonna force you, but we're gonna ask you to do overtime and to come in on weekends when you want to. We'll certainly provide you to pay you for that, and you'll be substantially compensated. But to really get people excited about the idea that we were going to solve this problem, that this was a team effort, and I made several trips out there throughout it. And within by the end of the year, I came on board in May, and by February of the following year, so less than 12 months, we had cleared that backlog. And amazingly enough, confidence from a lot of those stakeholder groups was restored when that happened. But you have to kind of put um, your money where your mouth is. Like you can't just claim these things. It's not Americans don't work that way.
Mhm.
Like, the observation I will make is also how do you restore trust in institutions? I'm most familiar with nonpartisan institutions like the Library of Congress, the Congressional Research Service, White House Historical, the National Archives. That's where most of my work has been in Washington, D.C. And I would say that, leadership comes from the top. If you don't have people that you can trust that are leading these
Mhm.
institutions, if you don't have trust in them, then everything kind of falls apart. My friend Carla Hayden was unfortunately removed from her position as Librarian of Congress a few months after myself, and I watched something really interesting happen at the Library of Congress. There was a mistake that happened after Dr. Hayden left her job, and it was just a technical error. They maintain at the Library of Congress a really great resource of an annotated constitution that has all the
Mm.
clauses of the Constitution. It's called Conan, Constitution Annotated, and it's annotated with all the different cases that have been decided that contribute to analysis for different clauses of the Constitution. Well, one day, and it was just a technical error. A part of the Constitution disappeared from Conan. It was a glitch, and
Mhm.
people really I watched online on social media, everybody jumped to the worst conclusion that this had been done, due to political influence, at the Library of Congress because Carla Hayden was no longer the Librarian of Congress. When she was
Oh, okay.
removed because of that, nobody trusted the institution. After
Right.
that, when I was so fascinated by it, I read almost all of the social media comments, and it really wasn't, just a mistake and an error, but people automatically jumped to the conclusion that it was because of, the political causes of her removal were to blame.
I
Imagine,
remember
I
that.
mean,
The
that's
Constitution was being
how
erased or something.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's our trust.
Yeah.
At the National Archives, when I was there, we had, there's all these, federal employment surveys. We were always kind of middle of the pack for the federal employment surveys about trust in leadership, trust in the institution, and these are done regularly from federal employees, from OPM, Office of Personnel Management. And after I left, then of course OPM didn't do the survey anymore. But then a nonpartisan nonprofit came in to do the survey, the Partnership for Public Service, and the National Archives is second to last in the entire federal government for trust in its leadership. And that is
Oh,
because of what happened, because, that's because of what happened. So, I really think it will take a lot of time for us to, reestablish trust in our institutions, but we're gonna have to be very careful of the people that we put in charge of them, and they have to realize that they're gonna have a lot of work to do in order to be able
mm.
to do it.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great answer. I appreciated what you were saying about how it's not automatic to make you can't just force people to trust you.
Mhm.
One of the things that was going through my head, I saw this study years ago. I- in the 1950s, residents of Mississippi were asked to survey, like, how much do you trust the state government to do what's right? And of course, this was at a time, this is like the height of Jim Crow. This is
Right.
a deeply segregated society. Legislature's all white men. It's very secretive, very old boys network.
Mhm.
There's no real records kept. It's very corrupt.
Right.
Nonetheless, people said they had a great deal of trust in their state government. Um, Same question was asked in the 1990s when it's a much more integrated
Right.
legislature. It's much more open records kept. It is by every measure a much more representative government, and yet people no longer trusted it. So it's not there's not necessarily
Well
yeah
when you have more information, sometimes
yeah.
I mean, I
Some
mean,
you might
great.
not like it, right?
Yeah, it's great to be transparent, but, this
Yeah.
is one of the things that we observe here in Washington, DC. I mean, C-SPAN plays a great role in Washington, DC to provide access to what goes on the floor of the House and the Senate, access to committee rooms to see hearings and all kinds of markups and things like that. But, I mean, I don't know if by providing that access, if necessarily people do they like what they see sometimes in,
Right.
with people fighting on the floor or what they see in committee? They didn't necessarily follow that closely, you didn't have access to that information, and so when you open things up, you have to be willing to understand that, it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So I want to pivot a little bit. One of the things I focus on a lot in my own research is political parties. Um, Parties play a vital but I think odd role in our political system. The Constitution really doesn't mention them. The founders largely hope to avoid them. The public doesn't like them at all. Yet we know that they play critical roles in our democracy and in many democracies around the
Right.
world in terms of governing, in terms of elections. I'm curious how you think about the proper role, the proper place of political parties as we think about, the country on its 250th anniversary.
Right, right. Well, I mean, I don't think we can have a large, diverse democracy, that is, fueled by representative institutions. I don't think we can have that in the United States without some organization. And in the United States, we have, a predominantly a two-party system, two major parties, and, could talk about whether that could ever change to have, a third party emerge or additional parties like we see in other, democracies. We know that for various features of the United States, it makes it less likely to have, more options, of parties. But I think that, you're right. I mean, I just finished this great book, on, Jefferson and Adams and their relationship. And yeah, there was just this real even amongst Jefferson and Adams, who were, of course, coming in the very beginning of the organizational of the party, the factional system that leads to the party system. they're very deeply distrustful of the organization of parties, mostly because of George Washington and the wording that Washington gives in his farewell address. But I mean, parties serve important functions. We can't expect all Americans to, study every particular policy and understand the ramifications of every policy proposal out there. We need to have parties that roughly espouse differing ideologies and approaches to the governmental system in the United States, so that when people go to vote, if they don't know the ins and outs of every particular candidate, they don't know the ins and outs of every particular policy that's before them, whether it's at the local level, state, or federal, that they are able to, that I think it's because I'm not touching my screen. I'm gonna have to touch my
Oh.
screen. That's the problem. Okay. Because we're just yeah. And, for political parties, we need to have that organization to enable participation in the country. Also, all kinds of other things in the United States, like the recruitment of candidates to run for office. I mean, political parties serve that function to recruit,
Mhm.
what we would hope to be qualified and good candidates to run for all levels of the political process. I think the features of the party system in the United States that have got us into the situation that we're in right now. I mean, I have to refer to the work of our fellow friend and colleague Francis Lee, who I
Mhm.
really I come back to this all the time. It is the particular features that we're seeing right now that parties are relatively homogenous by nature. There's great space between the parties ideologically, but most importantly, we are evenly split in the United States. We are relatively evenly split, whether we look at that through Congress or we look at it through our presidential elections or however we want to actually measure that. We don't have one, I would not say we have one dominant party in the United States today where you would say, oh, every election, that's the likelihood of the outcome. We are not in that type of realigned system where we have a dominant political party in the United States. And when every election is a nail biter. Like, I just saw a headline on Substack that said, "United States Senate, it's a toss-up." I mean,
Right.
and I think most people would say that that's probably the case. I don't know about the House. The House might be a little bit more, for the election to lean towards a party flip. But I mean, the Senate certainly, because of its individualized nature of those races, is going to certainly be a pretty close call. But when every election is do or die and every party is that means there is a disincentivization of compromise and collaboration. So the question to me is, can we ever go back to that system where parties, they want their side to win, they want their sides to do well, but compromise and collaboration aren't dirty words. The demonization of the other side is incredible today.
Mhm.
Certainly did not exist. For example, when I worked in the United States Senate, just merely about 20 years ago, it was certainly a different viewpoint. It does not exist that way at all. So, will we ever get back to that? The only solution that I have thought of, or the only change is and I always think of things like in macro political terms, is whether we if we would ever have a realignment in the United States again, where we do have a dominant party in the United States. And if we have a dominant majoritarian party in the United States, then the other party would behave as a minority party, and the majority party would behave as a majority party, and there would be actually, even though this is counterintuitive, there would be room for compromise, and every election wouldn't be a do or die election.
Mhm.
I don't know what you think about that, but I haven't been able to figure out a way to get us out of this cycle because with the closeness of elections, it puts everything on the line every time.
It's really striking, and I think, as you describe it, it's really historically unusual that we
Mhm.
have the White House and control of Congress flipping back and forth from election to election, over the past,
Right.
3 presidential terms, basically. I think there might have been some of that in, the Gilded Age, late 1800s, but, this
Or
is
yeah,
really
now,
unusually.
you have a little bit of back and forth there, yeah,
Yeah,
but that's
but
also leads
pretty.
up into, that
Yeah.
was the instability before leading to what we would consider to eventually be a realignment, right? Mhm.
Yeah. And just the fact that we've had this period of really no permanent majority party for a while now. Um, in some ways, it's good. Like I think back when like the Democrats always dominated Congress, and it seemed like Republicans were always dominating the presidency. There were a lot of people saying these should be more competitive. Well, okay, now, but that gives us the
Yeah,
system we have today, which
right.
people want to wait. One of the things I wonder, and Lee Drutman has been advocating
Yeah.
a lot for some sort of political reforms that would enable more parties, a more where the party system more represented the popular vote, and you could have three, four, or five parties out there. That would also take some of the weight out of, every election being a nail biter and everything riding on it. You could actually have parties forming coalitions
Mhm.
with others and potentially lowering the temperature a little bit and allowing for, some more creativity to go
You can
on.
have proportional representation in states for I mean, states are they can kind of figure out they get so many,
Mhm.
congressional seats. How they determine how those, congressional House seats are contrived is up it's up to states. So, could there be a way to have, proportional representation, which would incentivize either additional parties or would take the temperature down from single member districts. I mean, single member districts, I mean, that's it. You either win or you lose, right?
Right,
There's
right, yeah.
nothing in between. Is there a way that we can take the winner takes all out of politics? And that anytime you take the winner takes all out of politics, then you kind of have the ability for minority voices to be to be part of it. And it also incentivizes probably more people to participate because even if you're a minority view in your area, wherever you live, you have the opportunity by showing up, you have the opportunity to have some form of representation.
Mm, agree. Yeah, I think, um, it may have been Ezra Klein a number of years ago had this framework of, saying that we often complain that parties are not playing well within our political institutions. That they screw up impeachments, they screw up filibusters, like they make things a lot harder to operate. And I think he was arguing instead of complaining about the parties, maybe we should be trying to design institutions that work better with our partisan system here.
That's true.
Yeah,
Point. Mhm.
and I don't know that some election reform might be along the lines of that. I
Mhm.
want to ask one more question. I want to respect your time here. Um, you and I have both written about the role of populism in
Right.
United States politics. This came up in a number of your earlier academic work. I have a book coming out that really gets into this topic.
Mm.
Populism is interesting in that it takes advantage of people's distrust of the
Mhm.
system, and though it can give people a connection to an elected official that can actually make them feel
Mhm.
better about it, it can also increase their overall distrust in the system.
Yep.
I'm curious if you see populism as part of the trust problem. Can its issues be addressed in a way that populists would find satisfactory?
Yeah. I mean, populism has been let's be honest. I mean, populism has existed throughout the United States.
Mhm,
It's, probably since its creation. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you consider Thomas Jefferson as being the first populist. I don't know. Certainly, a lot of people say Andrew Jackson
mhm,
is a early originator of populism, and and Jackson claims Jefferson. So I don't know if you want to take it backwards at least one political generation, you would go all the way backwards. And a dissertation that was written before mine in graduate school, a really great dissertation, traced evidences of presidential populism in presidential rhetoric throughout American history, and it was all woven. I mean, there was waxing and waning of this populist sentiment, but it was apparent throughout
mm,
American history. So it's not something that's new. I think where we once again I go back to this idea that distrust of institutions is like a little bit of a double-edged sword. It's basically the degree of it. Same thing with populism. This idea of having distrust of elites, distrust of institutions. A lot, it's not, can be actually reinvigorating in American history. I wonder whether right now, by the way, instead of reading so much into what's going on in the Republican primaries, I just wonder whether we're in an anti-incumbency in period. Like, so we're
mm,
reading a lot into who's winning in these Republican primaries. but maybe it's bigger than that. It's anti-incumbency. So I wouldn't read so much into whether President Trump has influence. It's like whether or not this populist influence is powerful from both the left and the right. And it's the idea we're going to get these elites out of office, the people that have been entrenched for so long, and we're going to replace them with new people. So, I think whenever I think the other danger of populism, besides, total distrust of institutions, like I said, this healthy skepticism is good. A total distrust then gets us into situations where we're encouraging institutions not to function and not function properly. The other danger of populism is that we found throughout American history that populism often, and of course the Federalist was spot on this, is that populism often finds its home within one person, right? And all of the belief is targeted into and channeled into a particular leader or one person of this populist movement, and that can be quite dangerous, I think. Not so much for the person who is benefiting from it,
Right.
quite frankly, like Andrew Jackson, did pretty well. I would say Teddy Roosevelt did pretty well, but I would also say, look at the people who came after them, and look at the mess that they had to clean up.
Right.
Read the essay in Pursuit on Martin Van Buren, who was written by the Secretary of the Smithsonian, Lonnie Bunch. And, he was fascinated by Van Buren because Van Buren was an incredibly talented politician, follows Andrew Jackson into office. But he is just decimated when he's president of the United
Yeah.
States because he has to clean up all these problems. The panic of 1837 because of the bank crisis, that Andrew Jackson basically causes by the destruction of the second bank of the United States, which causes a huge economic crisis in the country. Andrew Jackson once again expands, in a populist sentiment, expands voting for white men, but then, narrows the notion of citizenship through Indian removal and through, of course,
Hmm.
aggressive movement to try to to not decrease slavery, in some cases spread slavery through the notion of popular sovereignty. So, and so then, but, Jackson isn't the one that's executing these policies. It's actually Van Buren when he comes in 1837, who's left holding the bag. Same thing with William Howard Taft after TR leaves office. He's the one that's actually left with having to deal with some of the policies that TR puts in place. And
Hmm.
Taft doesn't go so well for Taft, and then TR gets angry at him and ends up running against him in 1912, which causes, of course, Woodrow Wilson to get elected. So I would say that be very wary with populists because I would never want to follow a populist leader. It has not worked out really, really well in American history, and also I think in the history of other countries as well. It's some of the features once again are can be reinvigorating for American democracy. We are in some ways have an anti-elitist streak in our American political culture, and that's healthy to a certain degree. But does that extend to the point where we have distrust in institutions in which they cannot function? And of course, this comes back to the 2020 election. This notion that this election was not a legitimate election, that is a figment of populist sentiment, of course, and that sows distrust in the system itself, not just in the 2020 election, in the system itself.
And like you say, that can be a great moment to rally your particular supporters in that moment, but it creates a lot of problems down the road
Yes.
for people trying to keep a system running and trying not to have every election be a crisis situation.
And I think we're already kind of starting to see that in the
Yeah.
United States. I mean, so I think someone could write that article, a very easy comparison about some examples in American history of what we've seen. And it would, history doesn't always necessarily repeat itself, but there are patterns. We know this from political science. For those of us that study history through political science, there are patterns that repeat themselves. They're not exactly the same, but there are
Mm.
patterns in American history, and we can take lessons from some of those patterns to understand what we might be facing in the future.
Good tip for grad students out there listening today.
I've yeah,
um,
basically handed it
yeah.
to you right there. There's your thesis. There you go.
Colleen, I know you have to run. I really do appreciate your time today. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I want to thank everyone else for tuning in and listening. Final thoughts?
Well, I think everybody should read your book. So, when's your book
That would
coming
be
out?
awesome. My book is coming out on June 18th. So it's just about 3 weeks away.
That's terrific. And you're taking the long view here of the history of the Republican Party. You're going to look to see, where are we at right now? But it's not just like something that happened the past 8 years or 12 years,
Right.
right?
Right. This wasn't just invented in 2016. Like this, it took. I see it starting. This populist movement starting in like the early 1990s. Others trace it back far earlier to maybe things that were going on in the 60s. And
Mhm.
you're right. If we want, we could go back as far as Jackson, if not earlier.
Right, right, right. And please
But
read
yeah,
In
there's a
Pursuit,
lineage.
and our project goes on all year long in Pursuit, and we're, moving chronologically through the presidents and select first ladies, and next week, I have to put the plug in, we have a huge essay coming up next week for In Pursuit. President Obama has written the essay on Abraham Lincoln, and that will be coming out
Okay.
next Tuesday. It will post it at 6 a.m., next Tuesday. So please, if you haven't followed us yet on In Pursuit here on Substack, do that because then you will get President Obama's essay on Abraham Lincoln delivered into your inbox on Tuesday morning. And we also have a great essay on Mary Lincoln from Lois Romano, who just hit the New York Times bestseller list this week for her book on Mary Lincoln. She's written the essay later in the week on Mary Lincoln. And we continue the party because Annette Gordon Reed wrote the essay on Andrew Johnson, and we have General Stanley McChrystal on Ulysses S. Grant. So we have a number of great weeks coming up
Wow.
for In Pursuit. So join us now for the party as we start to, as we approach really the 4th of July and the apex of A250.
You're nailing it. And yes, everyone should really check out In Pursuit. Check out these fantastic essays. You locked down Obama and Lincoln. I'm really impressed.
Yes. Well,
So
if you're gonna have Barack Obama write an essay, of course. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
the 2 men from Illinois. I mean,
right.
who better to write, the essay on Abraham Lincoln? Just like George W. Bush wrote on George Washington. GW on
Perfect.
GW. Perfect.
Yeah. This is perfect. Okay, everyone check it out. I'll be sure to post links to it when I post this on this Modus report. But thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks again, Colleen. This has
Thanks,
been
Seth.
great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.